Hi, everybody. My name is Renee Reisman. I'm the Educational Programs Coordinator for the Los Angeles branch of California Lawyers for the Arts. We are actually a statewide organization that helps creative professionals across all artistic disciplines with legal issues. So there's actually a few different parts of our nonprofit that we do that I wanted to tell you about before I introduce Corey. The first is the educational programs, which is where you are right now. Usually they're in person, but as you can tell with coronavirus, we've decided to go online at least until the end of May, and then we'll take stock, of the situation in June. But for the time being, everything is going to be digital. So if you, for instance, I'm based in LA, but if you don't live in LA, you can join our workshops. And feel free to share it with people in different states if you think it might be helpful for them, even though everything we talk about will be specific to the state of California. So we do different topics. Today is 501c3. We actually have a workshop about AB5, which you can find more details on the website. And we're going to be scheduling more workshops. There'll be one about contracts in early May, again, run by the LA branch, but accessible to people across the web. We have two other services. We have a lawyer referral information service. So if you have a legal question and you need to get in touch with a lawyer, we have a program that can match you with an attorney that can help you out. There's a form on our website, calawyersforthearts.org, and you put in your information and what you're looking for, and we'll find you a match. That program works on a sliding scale. So depending on your income, it can be anywhere from pro bono to a pretty standard rate. And our last program that I would love to tell you guys about is our mediation services. This is a service for you to discuss your legal issues between you and another party with a mediator before going to court. So hopefully, if you have a dispute or some kind of issue that you need to resolve and don't actually want to go through the legal system quite yet, our program can, again, bring a mediator to the table and help you work the issue out. So thanks for learning about our three services. I am going to pass the virtual microphone to Corey, who's leading our workshop today.
Thank you. Yes, I did mute myself by accident, so thank you. Hi, everyone. This is my first time doing a Zoom presentation. I normally like to do in-person presentations and talk to everyone as they come in. I did see some of the responses in the chat, so I thank you for that. I know at some point as we wind up the presentation, we will ask for questions and try to answer some of your questions. And then a little bit about what I do right now. I've been practicing for 10 years now. I focus primarily on civil litigation. And I do have some business clients, and some of those clients are within the arts community. So just focusing on litigation for a minute before we get into the presentation, the mediation program is great. It's something that if you have a dispute, you should consider doing because litigation can be very, very expensive. So just another plug for the mediation program. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pull up the slides and get started on the presentation. Again, my name is Corey Carter. I focus on civil litigation, but I have extensive business experience as well in the law. I will say that normally I really like to interact with the participants. Unfortunately, just the nature of this kind of presentation, I'm going to need you to type your questions to Renee, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll have plenty of time to go back over some of those questions. Couple reminders. The law we discussed today is what I say is in Corey's universe. The reason I say that is this presentation is not going to be longer than an hour, and then we'll have some question and answers. And there's so much law, there's so much intersection of law. I know one of the questions brought up was whether sort of why to convert to a nonprofit had to do with AB5, for example. That's just an example of how there's so many different things that interact with what we're going to talk about today. It's a reminder that we're just talking about a really, really broad 30,000-foot view of nonprofit. The goal is to give you a good working understanding of those concepts we discuss, so you can issue spot and you can have a good idea of sort of what a nonprofit is and how it will work or not work for you. And then a disclaimer on my behalf: this is information only. This is not legal advice. So this is a presentation meant to inform you, not necessarily to provide you advice about your personal situation. So today we're going to cover, should I form a nonprofit, alternatives to nonprofit formation. We're going to cover the actual nonprofit formation, 501c3 status, which is really what most people are thinking about when they talk about nonprofit. And then keeping your actual charitable status. Why a nonprofit or 501c3? Generally, there's no taxable income. There's a charitable deduction for donors. You can get foundation and government grants because you're a 501c3. That's something that normally a for-profit company could not get. And then you also have this sort of public recognition, right? Or the halo effect. This is a nonprofit. They're doing good for the community. They're not just a for-profit lawyer, right? For example, there's actually a lot of nonprofits that are work with impact litigation, right? And they're lawyers, but they're actually working for a nonprofit for a specific cause. So why not? Well, for one thing, you don't own a nonprofit. You could form a nonprofit, you could create a nonprofit, and then before you know it, you can be removed, even if you're the one who started it. The other thing is compared with the profit business, as I'm sure most people know, you can't actually take on those profits. Those profits are just reinvested back into the nonprofit or given away. First thing you need to figure out with a nonprofit is who you're going to serve, right? And this just means who your target audience is going to be. Is it going to be elderly people? Is it going to be the arts community? Is it going to be homeless people? That's what you need to determine. And you need to think about how much time you as the founder have, or the founding parties if there's more than one. The reason this is important is because this stuff takes a lot of work. And I think it's very important that you have enough time to actually do it. The third thing that you want to think about is, can you get funding? So one of the biggest benefits of actually being a nonprofit is you don't necessarily have to generate income through sales or services of a product. What you can actually do is get funding through grants or donations. And that's one of the best things about being a nonprofit. This is something that I put up here. This is just an example of a really popular nonprofit. They founded this, the Free Store Food Bank, founded in 1971. They provide meals to families. I think this is in Ohio. So what they started doing is they started this rubber ducky prize drawing where people would adopt one of these ducks for a donation, and then they would dump the ducks into a river from like a helicopter or a truck, and whatever duck got past a certain amount would win some sort of nominal amount, and they were able to raise a lot of money that way. So that was something that's sort of one of the neat things that charities have done in the past. So there are alternatives. One is a fiscal sponsorship, which we'll get to. Another is a donor-advised fund. Another is volunteering for a nonprofit that you've already identified does something that is in the realm of what you want to do with your potential nonprofit, or volunteering by getting on a board of a nonprofit, which enables you to help, push the nonprofit maybe more in a direction that you think is important. So why do one of these alternatives? Well, one of the biggest reasons is ease the administrative burden and fees. You can test the waters for your nonprofit. You can piggyback on the 501c3 status of another nonprofit. And so it basically helps you sort of hit the ground running in a lot of different ways.
Fiscal sponsorship.
This is basically an agreement to work with an existing nonprofit. Basically, the sponsor defers to a committee to make project decisions. So basically, you could go to another nonprofit and say, look, I've got this project. I sort of have this mobilization group of people or infrastructure to complete it, but we do need help, and we think this project is within the scope of what your existing nonprofit already does. That way you can carry out your charitable activity and with the help of that fiscal sponsor, and they're going to be dealing with a lot of the administrative burdens.
Donor advised fund.
Donor advised fund. This is something that is a little different. This is basically if maybe you've got some money and you want to start a nonprofit, a donor advised fund can be a good option. What you're doing there is you're basically taking an amount of money and you're going to a nonprofit and you're saying, look, I know that I don't have any formal role in the nonprofit as if I were on the board and was able to vote on where these funds went, but I've got these funds and I want to provide them to the nonprofit. Typically, there's going to be a substantial amount of funds. And what I'd like is for you to, deliver another 100 meals a day to seniors, or, add another weekly class to your arts program for kids or something like that. And basically, the donor then has sort of an advisory role to the nonprofit. And obviously, that role is going to be really coveted and listened to by the board because the donor has funds and may have more funds in the future. And so that's another way to sort of address the philanthropic or nonprofit ideas or urges that a person may have is to do a donor advised fund. Forming nonprofit. The steps are sort of laid out here generally. You file articles of incorporation. You then file a statement of information, which you need to file every other year. You're going to draft bylaws, which are the rules that the board members are going to abide by when they're operating with the nonprofit. And then you are going to have to obtain any necessary permits or licenses. And then after you form your articles of incorporation, if that's the route you decide to go, you could do it a few different ways, but I'm going to focus on that way rather than a trust or an association because it's the most common way. And it's the way that kind of makes the most sense in most circumstances. Once you do all that, then you're going to file your actual tax exempt status, right? So this is the 501c3, or you could do a different 501c organization if it's not necessarily charitable purposes, like if you're starting an arts collective or something like that, like a sort of arts group. It may not be a C3. But a C3 is the very common one. It's the one for charities to get money, and have that really favorable donating tax treatment. So the form you use for that is IRS Form 1023 or 1023-EZ. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. And then the state form is FTB, that stands for Franchise Tax Board. 3500 or FTB 3500A, which is sort of the 1023-EZ state equivalent, or articles of incorporation. Example here in just a second, but for articles of incorporation, a one-sheet form that you can download from the California Secretary of State's website, and you fill it out and you file it with the state and you pay a fee. And what that does is it creates this separate legal entity. So just like with a for-profit business where you have to file your articles of incorporation, a nonprofit corporation would have to file articles of incorporation as well to create a separate legal entity. Now, again, as I said, you could be an association or a trust, but for our purposes, we're going to talk about a nonprofit corporation because I think it's the most common and makes the most sense in most circumstances. We're going to see an example of this one sheet that I was just talking about. You'll see the filing fee is $30. You mail it in, you fill it out. I would make a copy before I mail it in. But it's a pretty easy form to fill out. So this is a copy of the form. The name of the corporation is, put the name of the corporation. Now, a couple things. You're going to want to do a search first to make sure that no corporation name is already taken. You may have a really great name for a corporation for your nonprofit, and a lot of other people may have that really great name too. And so what you don't want to do is spend your $30, wait a month or two, in this case, or maybe even 3. I don't know what the processing timelines are now with this whole virus situation. It might be a really long time to get these processed. And then find out it's been rejected because it has the same name. So simple ways to do that. Way number 1, you can Google the name. Way number 2, you can go on the California Secretary of State's website. You can actually do a business name search. You can search it that way. And you can also do a name availability call with them to check before you send this in. Business address, that's self-explanatory. The service of process, this is just the person that is sort of going to be in charge. And if there's any legal correspondence that needs to be sent, it would go to this person that's listed for service of process. It's also the person that would be served if the business is sued. and where all other notices should go. This is the second half. You'll still see service of process there at the top. Under section 4, you're going to see purpose statement. So you have public purposes and charitable purposes. And then in part B, you have the specific purpose of this corporation is to. So this is your purpose statement. So to cover this, public purposes could be that you're maybe doing this arts collective, but you're not going to be necessarily collecting money for a charitable purpose. You can check that. In our case, we're talking about getting charitable status. So you'd probably check both boxes in most situations. And then you go to part B and you go to the specific purpose of the corporation is to, and then you put in what that is. So I'll give you an example. I pulled up the purpose statement of an organization that I work with or did work with, was on the board for a number of years, called One Generation. It's in the Valley. It's a great nonprofit that helps elderly people. And its purpose statement is as follows, just to give you an example. Promoting healthy aging and encouraging successful early childhood development, providing vital, quality, intergenerational programs to serve the needs of seniors, children, their families, and caregivers. So that's just an example of one that is being used currently. Yours could be shorter than that. Really, it could be much shorter. It could be something like, to provide underprivileged kids with art supplies, for example. So additional statements, this is just something that you're supposed to read and sign, and it sort of incorporates some of the requirements of being a nonprofit and being a 501c3 organization into this statement, so that when you file this, you're aware of what you're doing. So I'll go to one that's really interesting here is part C. Okay, so this says the property of this corporation is irrevocably dedicated to the purposes of Article 4, right, in Section B that we just read. And no part of the net income or assets of this corporation shall ever inure for the benefit of any director. So one of the consequences of, one of the downsides, if you will, to being a nonprofit is you close that nonprofit down, you don't get to take your football and go home, right? You don't get to take the assets of the company and go, you know what, I converted this to a nonprofit 10 years ago. I don't like how it's working out now. I'm going to take the assets that I gave to the nonprofit back. Doesn't work like that. Those assets, if the nonprofit closes, need to be, to the extent possible, given to a nonprofit that does something similar, if possible. Anyway, that's it. It's a one-page form. It's really easy. You definitely want to read the instructions. The instructions are about 4 pages and can be found online as well. But it's not too difficult to do. Applying for the actual tax exemption with the IRS. So you've got your Form 1023. You've got your FTB Form 3500. And then by this time, you should have already drafted your bylaws, which with the Form 1023, I believe, has to be actually sent to the IRS, as I recall. This just summarizes the IRS Form 1023. So the form itself is 30 pages. Last time I did a long form, which was a couple of years ago, the entire packet sent to the IRS was 70 pages. It was a lot of work, and it took a lot of time. The 1023 EZ is 3 pages, so way less time and way easier to do. You can actually file last time I checked, you had to mail in the 1023, but you could do the 1023 EZ online. The 1023 EZ, I think it only took me a week to get a response last time I did it. And the 1023 form actually took, I want to say months, many months, 3 months, 6 months. It took a really long time. Just to show you an example of the 1023 EZ form. This is just the first page. I'm not going to zoom in on it or anything like that. If you go online to the IRS website, you can pull up this form and read through it. It's pretty simple. It's like I said, it's 3 pages. One of the requirements for this particular form to use the 1023 EZ versus the 1023 is that you can only, I believe, receive, I think it's $50,000 for any year for the first 3 years of the nonprofit. So the reason they did this, I believe, is because a lot of people were spending a lot of time, energy, and money on these, 30-page application, and then they raise $6,000 for the nonprofit for the year, which might not even be enough to cover all the administrative costs. So the IRS said, hey, you know what, we're going to do this 1023 EZ form. It's really short. You get a response back right away. And as long as your returns are showing no more than $50,000 in the first 3 years per year, I believe, then you can use it. You can always let the IRS know that afterward that, oh, wow, you know, we anticipated 50,000, but now we're going to do more. What do you need from us? So that's always something you can do later if all of a sudden turns out you have way more people donating to your nonprofit. That's a great problem to have. The 1023 filing fee is $600. The 1023 EZ is $250 or $275. So it's substantially cheaper than the 1023. Now, after you get that done, so let's say you do the 1023 EZ. After a month, you get it back. It's been approved by the IRS. Great. Well, the next step is you need to file for tax exempt status in California because California taxes people as well. So the Franchise Tax Board, the 3500 form is 20 pages. The 3500A form is 2 pages. This is just an example of the 3500A form. So this form, getting all your information and then attaching your approval letter from the IRS, and the Franchise Tax Board, you know, basically then says at that point, okay, I've got the approval letter from the IRS. If it's good enough for the IRS, it's good enough for us. And then they approve you pretty easily, pretty quickly. And that might take a little bit longer because I don't believe last time I checked that they had an efficient online way of doing that. So you just have to get your letter from the IRS, prepare this form, and send it in. This is another requirement that you have. The California Department of Justice requires that you file a form CT1 and that you file renewals with them as well. This is just a form letting them know that you are a nonprofit operating in California. It is not the same as the Franchise Tax Board. They don't necessarily know what the Franchise Tax Board is doing. So you need to let the California Department of Justice know, hey, we're a nonprofit, we're going to be soliciting donations, et cetera, et cetera. So if you just Google California Department of Justice nonprofits, if you just Google that, you can navigate pretty quickly to their nonprofit or charitable giving page. And they've got some really helpful resources there. One of the most helpful resources is there are people that do grant writing or fundraising for nonprofits. And it actually has all the sort of stats on that because there's reporting requirements. And so you can go there and say, oh, how does this fundraising entity do normally? And it'll say they raised X number of dollars for the organization and how much did the organization receive from that fundraising effort, right? A percentage of that number. And that's really helpful as you form your nonprofits because it's a good opportunity if you meet someone or you referred someone to go check them out on that website, see if they're there, see if they're registered, which they're supposed to be. And you want to make sure you're registered there because you don't want a potential giver, potential donor, especially someone with deep pockets, to go and look for you there. And whoops, you didn't file your CT1 form, which is a couple pages. I think it's 4 pages. I just attached the first page so you could just sort of see what that form looked like. You know, it's definitely something you're going to want to do as well, because if you get a really sophisticated donor and they don't see that you filed this, you know, it could sort of create, hey, these people don't have their stuff together. Maybe we'll just find a different charity to give it to. Blowing the tax exemption or you know, creating a problem for the nonprofit. So some of the problems with some of the other things that limit what a nonprofit can do. So they can't, let's start with electioneering. So they can't, in terms of electioneering, they can't voice support for a specific candidate, right? If they do that, they could lose their tax exempt status. So no private inurement. I don't know why I put that word inurement other than the fact that they use that word in both the California Articles of Incorporation and I believe in the 1023 form and the IRS rules. But basically this means you as a director can't get some benefit from the nonprofit that you would normally get in a for-profit corporation. So, you know, if you are a director, you can get paid. If you provide services, you can get paid. But you shouldn't be saying, oh, I'm going to start this nonprofit and then the nonprofit's going to, you know, pay the rent at my warehouse or something like that. There are rules about that. So in California, at least, that's called a self-dealing transaction. And if you are on the board and you're engaging in that kind of behavior, you can do that, but there's special rules and hoops you have to jump through, like notifying the California Department of Justice and getting their approval, or having everyone on the board sign off on it. And sometimes there are reasons to do a self-dealing transaction, such as, you're going to give the nonprofit a really good rate on rent because you care about the nonprofit, but you are going to benefit because you're getting paid rent. Those are some problems that can create a problem for the nonprofits. So I'd like to open it up for questions via the chat.
Is there a benefit for a fiscal sponsor to sponsor someone else?
Well, sure. So the benefit to them is that they're typically doing another project within their umbrella of whatever their charitable purpose is. So the advantage to them is not only are we looking for funding, we're looking for manpower, we're looking for connections, we're looking for ideas, we're looking to expand the good that they're doing in the community based on their purpose statement. So that's the advantage to the entity that's actually helping to do the sponsorship.
Can I file the articles of incorporation online?
So no, you can't file it online. Right now, the only entity that you can do online is an LLC. That's the only one that they'll let you do online. So if you Google California Secretary of State business search, you will get sort of the main business page where you can actually pull up the articles of incorporation. You can fill them out, and then you have to mail them in right now. I don't believe that they have the ability to file it online right now. They only do that for the LLC.
Can I look up existing nonprofits' articles of incorporation?
On that same page, if you do the business search, you can type up other organizations that you know, and you can pull up their articles of incorporation, so they're visible to the public.
Will my purpose statement be public? And if so, who should I write it for? The audience.
On that same page, you can view their purpose statements. So your purpose statement will be viewed. The purpose of your purpose statement is to let donors know what you're doing, let the state know what you're doing. A nonprofit is sort of a corporation that is more answerable to its stakeholders than its shareholders. Its shareholders are the people that it's serving, kind of, even though they don't have a vote in the same way that for-profit shareholders would. So your purpose statement really is geared towards donors and making sure that you're not in violation of your own bylaws, right? Because if your purpose is really narrow and then you're doing something outside of your purpose, you could actually have some form of liability. So you kind of want to make sure your purpose is broad enough to encompass everything you envision doing. That document is a public record. It's posted online. It's for the public. It's for the state of California. It's to hold the organization accountable so that people know what the organization is doing. And it's also for the donors because they want to know what they're donating to, right? People that you're soliciting donations for as a charitable organization. So that's what it's for. And it is, to be very explicit, it is public. You can go online and view all the articles of incorporation going back to like the 80s, the late 80s, I think. And if you really wanted to, you could probably go to Sacramento and view the ones that were filed way before then.
What is the benefit of filing the longer versions of the Forms 1023 and 3500 versus the shorter versions 1023EZ and 3500A?
The only real benefit is that if you're raising more money, you have to do the larger forms. Yeah, well, really, it's the 1023. So if you're the 1023 easy is primarily if you're bringing in less than 50,000, and I believe it's 50,000 a year in the first 3 years. The 1023 easy is for that. The FTB 3500A, and I see this goes to another question. It's the short form for the IRS approval. So if the IRS approved you, you can do the 3500A form, and they're basically, so if the IRS approved you, we approve you. And it doesn't matter if you did the 1023EZ or the 1023. As long as the IRS approved you in either way, you can do the FTB 3500A.
Can a foundation that disperses funds, for example, a grant-giving foundation, be considered a 501c3?
Yes. Yeah, I think they're treated a little differently, but they're still organized as a 501c3.
How do you start writing your bylaws, and are there any resources to assist in their drafting?
Again, the bylaws are just rules that the directors are going to use, and there's sort of like a playbook as to how the directors are supposed to operate the nonprofit. There are plenty of bylaws online. I mean, if you Google bylaws, you'll pull up all kinds of bylaws. I don't know how good any of them are. I think Nolo Press oftentimes has good resources, so that might be a good place to start. My favorite place to start is the bylaws of existing nonprofits. So if you're able to Google some nonprofits that you're aware of, they might even post their bylaws on their website. That might be a good starting point, because you can say, all right, here's a successful nonprofit. Here are the bylaws they use. Look at a couple, take the things you like, remove the things you don't like, and ask someone that knows what they're talking about the things that you don't understand. I think that would be the simplest way to get started.
What are some of the oversights and red tape that California imposes on nonprofit organizations?
Sure. So if you look at the Articles of Incorporation form that I had in the slide, and you can just go to the California Secretary of State's website. If you look at that form in section 5, at the very bottom before you sign, it lists a number of things. Those are the main restrictions. And really, I mean, it's, no self-dealing. You can't create and keep the profit. There's the restriction that I referenced earlier. It's not listed there, but it may be a city restriction in a LA city, but it's the restriction on the amount between the lowest paid worker and the CEO. So there are a number of restrictions. You just have to look them all up and know them. But most of them, I mean, really, the really broad and big ones are going to appear on that sheet that I referenced, that Articles of Incorporation sheet.
If a nonprofit organization raises money to repair a church, can it qualify as a 501c3?
Yeah, I don't know. Is the organization, well, I guess one of the questions would be if the organization was formed just to repair that one church. And then it is possible. I mean, lots of churches have historical value as well, as more than just religious value. So it may qualify for that reason. There are different religious designations, but again, if it's to repair one church, it may be. I don't know. I've never actually encountered that before. It's possible.
What is the difference between a board of directors and an advisory board?
So a board of directors is they're the actual group of people that make the decisions for the nonprofit. So in a for-profit business, the shareholders elect board of directors, and the board of directors vote on behalf of the shareholders. And then the CEO or the executive or the president, they do what was voted on. They put it into place. So in a nonprofit, the board is they're brought in, different board members are brought in by the executive or by donors or other people in the community, just to make sure that the nonprofit is operating above board, pursuing their mission. An advisory board might be something that you have for certain donors because they're providing a lot of additional money, but you don't want them to necessarily have any legal binding authority as a director for their vote. Another issue is with boards. Nonprofit is a really unique area for boards, because boards oftentimes have this thing called a give, G-I-V-E, get, G-E-T, a give get. And what that means is that each director on the board is required to either give a certain amount of money to the organization or get it, raise it some other way. And so sometimes a board says, look, our main board, you have a get of $2,000 a year, but the organization might want to have input from other people that maybe can't afford that or don't want to have that responsibility of being a director. They still want their advice and input. So generally, I could think of an advisory board as a good thing. The only cons I could think would be maybe having sort of an additional group of people who's coming up with ideas and whatnot that maybe isn't interacting as much with the main board. And maybe that could create some resentment in the organization, but I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think the biggest con is administrative burden. Now you have to have a secretary or CEO or someone at those other meetings just to hear what's going on and pay attention and keep them going.
What is an indemnification clause?
An indemnification provision is basically a provision that says someone else is going to take the responsibility for certain actions. And so one of the concerns a director may have is that they don't want to act on behalf of the company or the nonprofit and then have there be some sort of legal consequence where they're being sued personally and they have to hire a lawyer personally. So one thing that could be in the bylaws is an indemnification provision that says the nonprofit will pay for the legal defense of any director so long as the defense is for actions arising out of the scope of the director's work with the nonprofit. Another thing to do, or that should be done, is presumably there should be some insurance to cover a defense for directors.
Can you hire someone to file your tax documents and incorporation documents? How much might that cost?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can hire an accountant to do the filings. In terms of the tax filings after you prepare to return, I mean, that's just whatever an accountant charges. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe $1,000, maybe a lot less, depending on how the books look of the organization. In terms of forming it, you're looking at the $30 filing fee, $5 for like a certified copy and sending it in mail. You're looking at another, I think $275 for the 1023 EZ, and then I think the FTB charges a couple $100. So I mean, you're probably looking at a bare minimum of $600 in fees and whatnot just to form the entity at the very beginning.
In California, after you file with the Franchise Tax Board, do you have to file with the Department of Justice? What about in other states?
In California, after you file with the Franchise Tax Board, you get a notice from the Franchise Tax Board that actually says, hey, be sure to register with the California Department of Justice. Hopefully, if you're in another jurisdiction, you would get a similar notice to let you know that you need to do that.
If an application lists the organization as an association, can it be changed to corporation later?
An association is an acceptable form for a charity. For a 501c3, that's an acceptable form to be. I think corporation is just something I'm used to. It's something I see a lot of. I think it makes more sense. I think it's more structured. I'm not sure at what stage you're at of your application if you just prepared it and now you're thinking, hey, maybe we should have been a corporation instead, or if you've already paid the filing fee. Almost anything can be changed at any time. I think the bigger issue is it necessary and how much is it going to cost and how much time is it going to take to do it? But I do think organizing as a corporation is normally the best thing to do because it's just more structured.
Do you have any final advice?
I think the only other thing to think about is if you are thinking about forming a nonprofit, I would really encourage, I think there's more than 1 million filed nonprofits in the US. And so I would really consider looking, reaching out to other people that have started nonprofits or run nonprofits, see if there's any way that you can work with them. If maybe your vision and what you want to, your purpose works with theirs, it may be something where you can jump in and do a lot more good right away than spending a lot of time on administrative hurdles. Or you can establish a mentor relationship with those other nonprofits or nonprofit directors or executives. I think that's basically the only thing I would encourage people to do.